We're good. We're good. We're good.
The hair is live, feel it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Black.Queer.Alive. I am Mimi Tempestt, and we are in season 3. I am so excited. Wow. I never thought that this series would get this far, but we're here with Sacharja. Hi, Sacharja.
Hi.
um, Before we came on, y'all, Sacharja was like fixing
Thank
hair, trying to make sure you were all fly. You look perfectly fly, I promise.
you.
Let's see. Let's get into it. So tell me about yourself, my dear. Age, occupation is a weird word, but what you're passionate about,
Mhm.
um, and what motivates you.
All right. So I am 23, but I'm about to be 24 in like 10 days.
Ooh,
Um,
you're a
yeah.
Capricorn?
Yes. Yes.
Nice. Hi, Cappy.
Hi. And right now I'm an instructional designer, so that's my occupation. But more broadly, I'm passionate about education, so I definitely see myself in that field, and I think I'm especially recently still thinking about different kinds of ways I can be an educator, and I'm trying to not limit myself, especially since I think increasingly as of late, there's a need to complicate the traditional or conventional ideas of being an educator. So I'm really trying to find out, where the need is and where can I meet those needs based on, what I'm working with myself. So definitely an educator and looking forward to broadening what that means in the future. Yeah, I think that's it.
I saw in your response that you had a discussion with one of your friends about about Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed. I find that text to be one of those. For me, I just like dip in and out of it. Like it's not something that you just like read and it just like stays there. You have to like constantly interact with it and remind yourself of different um perspectives in which you can educate or teach. How has that influenced you?
So I think I guess the text was very much contextualized by the experiences of myself and my friend. So it was actually her idea to read the text because, especially last year, there were so many like PDFs and recommendations going around.
Yeah.
And some of them, like that text, is very dense and hard to get through. So she recommended that we hop on a FaceTime and work through it together. And I think it's given me some necessary hope at times because I think 2020 just took a lot of that. Like I found myself dipping into hopelessness a lot, and I think I haven't really been as self-reflective as I have been about education and myself as an educator. Um, and I think that text and what it was talking about really teased a lot of that out. So it was really helpful. And it was a lot, though. It was a lot. Sometimes he was doing too much. And I think that's what made it great to be going through it with somebody. But I think it really was helpful to take a huge step back and figure out how I can really implement this stuff. Like, not just read it, be like, oh, okay, this was on somebody's recommended list and it's important and all of that stuff. But like, how is this actually going to show up in whatever work that I'm doing? So it was really powerful at times and confusing at times as well. So I don't think it was just like a one and done. Like I read it and then I could apply it to whatever I'm doing. I think it's definitely going to be a process, but overall necessary, I think.
What is your I agree. I chunked that book out. I can't sit down and focus on it. I have to, okay, I'm gonna read this chunk and then I'm gonna apply it, test it, some of these concepts and practices, and then you go back to it. So it's definitely one of those. A very interactive text. I like that. What is your experience in being Black in the academy? I know a lot of people. I hear, I contend with it a lot for myself. I've become in my own work. I've become a little cynical, like
Yeah, yeah,
how I
yeah.
participate. But everyone who is Black has their own way of seeing themselves within it. So how do you see yourself within the academy?
Ooh, it's very much a process because I think about how I saw myself at the beginning, and then how I see myself now. So I guess a little bit of background to frame it. I think I'm gonna take off my glasses because there's a glare. Um, but at the beginning, I think it was already hostile in a way because my first year of college, like in higher education, I like on Hamilton's campus, where I went for undergrad and where I work now. But that experience, there were a lot of protests around. Um, I don't want to use diversity, equity, inclusion because those terms are very much obsolete for me. But I think student belonging. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of demonstrations and issues going on. So my introduction into higher education was very much uh, being denied that feeling of belonging. And I think just thinking about how that grew. So like my second year of college, that was the year of Trump's election. So it was being in a space where people were telling you, oh, we need to just have conversations about your livelihood. Yeah. So I'm like, there were like knowing there were Trump supporters on campus, and it was an expectation that we were supposed to, just talk about these very things that were controlling people's material lives. I think that was also another crucial step. And then my third year, I was actually really frustrated to the point where I studied abroad. And I think this is a lot of people's experience, especially like Black people, at least who I know. So I studied abroad in Ghana, trying to understandably but somewhat naively escape, the predominantly white higher education space. And then my senior year, it was okay, let me just tough it out, get my diploma, and keep it moving. And I think I tried to combat a lot of the feeling of like alienation as a Black person in that space by further immersing myself into Black history, Black scholarship, Black queer history. So a lot of my thesis was focused on myself and the history of Black poor gay men as the demographic related to spoken word poetry. So I really tried to do the best with what I had to really surround myself with that knowledge and that pride and that love. And then I ended up like I'm still at Hamilton right now, so I'm also seeing things from the perspective of a full-time employee. So I think I'm grateful that I had the perspective as a student, as a full-time employee, as a student at another institution on a whole other continent in a whole other country. So all of that is really informing my, I guess, perspective now, which is that being in those spaces has shaped me as much as being like against those spaces, because I think a lot of my experience was I'm here, a lot of it is overwhelming, but also on the daily I'm like fighting against aspects of these spaces, and that was just as formative. And then I think that is still going on. As a full-time employee, there are a lot of things that I have a problem with, and especially recently, having learned so much about abolition and what does it mean for these institutions to continue, and how a lot of people think that they can be reformed when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion. And me as a Black person, I've seen so much evidence that there is no hope for these places. So I think I'm trying to really figure out how I fit into that conversation, and who's willing to actually come to terms with that truth. Because I think as a Black person, I'm very close to seeing that and experiencing that, the fact that there's no hope for these places. But I think a lot of people aren't, so they're holding on to these spaces for various reasons. But I think for me, that's what's most true. Like, there needs to be a complete reimagining and a complete recreation of not only academia, but the education system in general.
Yeah, altogether. Yeah, I appreciate that answer. Um, it's a lot more it's a lot more sophisticated response than I have. I turn into a complete cynic, and it comes out into my work. You mentioned a lot about your poetry. Um,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any collections that we can purchase or can look forward to, or let us know one about what your work is and where it could be found?
Yeah, so I'm working on that. I'm very much new. I'm a baby poet, I guess. I mean, actually, let me say what I mean. So I've been writing poetry for like 7, 8 years now, but I've only recently started finalizing a lot of poems that I think reflect me as a poet. Um, and that's a testament to my close friends and some opportunities that I took advantage of last year. But I don't have anything like published or a collection yet. I don't even have a place where people can find my poetry. I'm working on it, but my process is incredibly slow. So I definitely plan to create those spaces and do release like a collection not very soon, but soon-ish. So we'll see. But I think one of the things that I've been thinking about is trying to generate like a community of people who are interested in my work through like social media perhaps, and then from there once I have people who are aware of me, then they could support the work. But I also need to like actually have a lot of work first, so I'm working on that now. And it's a slow and steady process, but it will get there. I've been speaking it into existence, so it's coming.
Got this. You got this. Let me know whenever you got something. I would love to hear some of your work. I like I don't know. I poetry. I have like a love and hate
Mhm.
poetry. I love it. I love to write poetry. I don't like necessarily like being in like readings and stuff like that. Or unless I know who exactly is gonna be in there. But I always like listening. I have I have an ear for stuff. I like listening to stuff people have never heard before. So I would love to check your work out sometime. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you, I appreciate that.
Um, let's see. If you feel comfortable, what's your gender expression and how do you sexually identify?
So I've been thinking about this. Like right now, I am a cisgender gay man, um, but as I've gotten more aware of like gender and all that stuff and sexuality, I think that definitely may evolve and develop. But I think for right now, that's what I'm feeling.
Okay. I like that. I like that. Right now, this is what it is.
Yeah.
Cool. Where do you find home?
Yeah, I wrote some like notes for the for these questions. Yeah, because I need like a lot of time to like think, and sometimes I could ramble. So I try to make it clear and to the point. But I think, and this is something that I started really thinking about my senior year of college, like the different kinds of home that um, I guess, know to be true. And, there's being at home within myself, which, is it's a journey, it's a process. And then there's, the more interpersonal home with friends, loved ones, family, chosen family. And then the larger aspects of being at home or trying to find home on a much more like national scale, which is definitely a whole mess. But I think definitely to start, I've come a long way with finding home within myself. And that is a testament to poetry and the people that I've surrounded myself with and how I've actively sought that. Like, it's definitely not guaranteed or given, especially as a Black queer person. So I think that is definitely something I'm noticing and self-reflecting on, that progress from, when it first started to really be a goal for me throughout adolescence, and then where I am now in my young adulthood, and how there's still so much ground left to cover, but there's definitely been a lot of progress. And then I think one thing that I'm always, grateful for, in the sense that it saves my life and it has saved my life a lot, is being at home with my chosen family, friends, loved ones, everyone. And I think that those two things are so connected. I find myself just really thinking about how any progress that I'm making being at home is directly related to who I'm loving and who's supporting me and who's really in my corner. Especially since things seem to get more difficult and complicated. Like these past couple of years, I think since like 2018, it was very much like, okay, next year is going to be better. This year, well, can I can I curse and stuff?
Yes, you can do whatever you want. It's your
Okay. Okay. Well, it felt like each year things were getting harder, and I think because of that, I was leaning on like the affirmation in a lot of my circles more and more. And there's very much, when I look at how I survived 2020, where we made it to this new year, or some of us rather, that was definitely, I guess, in community with a whole lot of people. And I think that has also been just like something that I've thought about a lot, how when I think of home, for various reasons, it's always been in terms of people, and feelings and like emotional spaces rather than like physical spaces. And I think that is because of, poverty. Like was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm here now in Coney Island, and it's still, with this rent, with this, with a whole lot of other things, it's like I'm being denied home in a lot of ways when it comes to physical space because of all of the like institutional and structural factors. And then in terms of like this country, I think about how my adolescence was, in direct parallel with the Black Lives Matter movement. So I haven't felt at home in America since, the the murder of Trayvon Martin. So I think that is very much loud and clear to me that, there isn't a large scale home for me and too many other Black people, but we do what we can with, strengthening those relationships with our loved ones. So I think that has been very and increasingly clear as the years go by.
It sounds, I now what you said about I haven't felt home in America since Trayvon Martin. That for a lot of young people who witnessed that for the first time, yeah, that could definitely do one in on you or on a generation of Black children. Um, how does your queerness or gayness um How is that incorporated into your activist work or abolition work?
Hmm.
And what are the conversations that you're having with people who are not Black and queer, for example?
Um, I think, and I think what's helpful or what has been helpful recently, um, have been listening to other Black and or queer folks talk about queerness, much more as like possibility, um, because, growing up and like, when I finally, disclosed my queerness to my mom, like in those moments where you're sort of have to defend the identity, it's always a matter of, like I was born this way, or there's no way that I can change it. Like almost as if I'm stuck with the identity and I have to make peace with it. But two people that come to mind. So Feminista Jones and Ocean Vyong.
You like
They have.
Vong's work?
Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You like Ocean Vong's work?
Yeah, I actually haven't read it too much, but I listened to a podcast that he was on, and I like saw it on Twitter, and then he was talking about this idea, but that's really sparked me to get into more of his work. But I think his, because he, in speaking about queerness, he says that queerness saved his life because it forced him to see alternatives to what he was given in terms of like imagination, seeing what was possible for himself. And I think in the podcast, he talks about how, in a sense, you have, like, as a queer person, you have to get comfortable with saying no when you're being taught and like socialized to think, okay, speaking more of myself right now, I was supposed to be, this toxic masculine person who gets into a hetero normative, not just heterosexual, but heteronormative relationship. And, you know, all of the things that come with that. So I think queerness has very much given me the audacity at times to say, like, that is not who I am, that's not what I want. And especially recently I've been thinking about, um, what does freedom mean on the most personal level, and more broadly on a larger level, thinking outside of what people are constantly telling me is like possible or what should happen. So thinking about the Black family, like what does that mean in a more traditional sense, but what does that mean when it's queered? For me, like I like personally, I don't want children or anything like that. And I've been thinking about like eventually when I find a partner and all of that stuff, like I think I would be in a space to do a lot of inner child work and heal those parts of myself. So in a sense that can be a more fulfilling replacement for me rather than feeling pressure that I have to have kids. And I think that in terms of like abolishing very stubborn ideas that we see a lot when it comes to identity, family, and like what are we working towards. I think queerness has allowed for me to just question all of that and think about alternatives and actively choose um, to have pride in and express my queerness. Because what Feminista Jones talks about is that the defense of it, of being queer is like, oh, I didn't have a choice, like all of that stuff. But I think what she was saying is that there is a choice in actively choosing to not only be honest with ourselves, but to express queerness, whether that be in challenging like family structures, like marriage, that and it comes in so many different forms. Like queerness not not just as, you know, who you're romantically and sexually intimate with, but how are you seeing so many different like institutions and experiences. So I think I I take pride in like choosing all that queerness has to offer, because I think there's so much there that we can use and that is so necessary to freeing a lot of us, and that's inclusive of people of all different um, sexual, romantic, and gender backgrounds. Like there's so much to offer, like that's so much that queerness has to offer, and it's a matter of us seeing it not as this like limiting space of, okay, I'm queer so I'm suffering and all that, which is unfortunately like true, but there's a lot of, you know, wisdom and example of how we can be freer through queerness. So I think I use that to really inform, you know, my poetry, my conversations with people, and just how I'm actively envisioning all of these different possibilities that I hope will be here very, very soon. I don't want to say that, oh, it's going to take lifetimes from now. I think there's definitely, as we have seen this past year, there's an urgency for it and a need.
Mhm. It's so interesting. I agree a lot with what you said. It's kind of the reason why I created Black.Queer.Alive, because I was one, it was in response to I think a lot of people who deem themselves like radicals or progressives, revolutionaries, abolitionists, specifically in the Black community, when it comes to Black and queerness, it seems like that's where the imagination stops. It's like, oh, we can't do that gay shit. We that's not that gay shit, queer shit. We don't do that here. So I became wildly curious about how this intersection could be expressed in a multiplicity of ways. So yeah, I think that, you know, it's, we're a vine. It's not like this straight
Mm-hmm.
streamline, you know, X, you know, plug in X, you get Y. I think there's just so many myriads of expressions, and it was my dream kind of to like explore it as much, you know, for as long as possible and for as much as possible. I want to ask you, I'm gonna, I am gonna pick and prod a little bit with this interview. Um,
Okay.
what,
Sounds good.
because, you know, for me, you know, I came from LA queer underground. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was tussling and performing and learning and cussing and fucking and with like the queerest of the queer underground kids in Los Angeles that you could find at the time. So for us, all the academic, you know, even though I participate in the academy now, but all the academic hoodoo of everything was just like, what? Like, I don't give a fuck. like, suck dick in the bathroom because I want to, you know, or, you know, I'm going to start coking this institution because I don't give a fuck and I wish the cops would say something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how much of I feel like there's just a packaging of queerness that is happening right now. You know, within the academy, within the discourse.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when's the last time you broke a rule or did something wild?
Oh.
I'm
um.
interested in queering for you in particular. You seem so you're very much Capricorn. Uh, you seem very astute and uh, I don't want to say packaged in a bad way. I'm not saying it that, but when's the last time you broke a rule? Like, you know, was like, fuck this shit. I'm gonna burn down and stomp the ground until I absolutely can't anymore.
I think that's a good question, because I don't know. I feel like I'm I've developed a more rebellious spirit, but I mean, when you're asking me that, I think it's not like a specific moment or whatever is not coming to mind. And I don't know. I'm wondering if it's more so like um, I haven't been in spaces or have opportunities where I could do that like more explicitly, but because I feel like I think my politics and my way of like what I want to do is very much that energy. But when it comes to challenging everything and wanting to burn um, everything down, I think it's very much in its like abstract stages right now, and I'm still learning about how do I make my actions reflect that.
Got you.
Yeah.
I see. What are you searching for?
Um, so I think I'm searching for that clarity when it comes to what does a world outside of what we're seeing look like. I think I've been really trying to read more and attend like virtual events and speak this out with my friends and just really figure out what is my ideal neighborhood going to look like. What is a world after the abolishment of prisons, like gender, all of these different areas? Because I think many times like it's overwhelming, so I have to be very graceful with myself with not trying to like find all of the answers, because I think that's also how I am. Like I do find comfort in more, I guess, exact or concrete like, answers to certain things. And I think there's a lot of ways that this dreaming and this imagination doesn't necessarily center that mindset. So I'm searching for that clarity, and that's a lot of, I think, it's not just like intellectual work. I think it's a lot of spiritual work, because there are a lot of ancestors that have commented on this, done the work in beginning this process of envisioning. So a lot of how I search for that clarity is looking back on their scholarship, their interviews, their lives, and seeing what I can find to inform my own. And I think in terms of what I'm searching for, that's the big picture, and I think more on a smaller scale, I guess. I'm searching for home, and when it comes to like a physical house, apartment, or whatever. Like I'm definitely on Zillow stressed a lot of the times, because it's living in New York City has become so difficult, and that's due to gentrification, and especially like moving away and living away from for school, and then coming back and seeing just how things are rapidly changing, and a lot of what I remember to be where I grew up is no longer here. And it's not just random or just by chance, and this is all deliberate. So I think I'm searching for a physical space, because I think even though I have found home with relationships, I think it's very naive of me to think that that is enough. While there's just like an abundance of love and things that I need in those relationships, at the end of the day, people need a place to live, and I think that has been something that has been very unresolved for me, and my family. Thinking about my mom and how she started this process like decades ago, trying to make it work in New York City, and it's not by chance that it's like decades later it's still a problem. So I'm definitely searching for that, and it's incredibly difficult, and I get a lot of hopelessness in that, but you know got to keep going, I guess. So
I feel you. I feel you. Um, who's the first person that you mentioned a few, but who's the first person that you saw or heard um, or listened to that that helped you feel like feel connected to who you are today?
Um, I think the first person that comes to mind is James Baldwin. He specifically with Go Tell It on the Mountain. So I think of my identity as a writer. And I remember, so when I got to high school, you know, that first year, that was the first time I got like a laptop, because I went to a really privileged elite boarding school, and with that came all of these benefits. So I got a laptop for the first time, and I remember I started like writing this like sci-fi novel,
Mhm.
and when I was writing it, all of the characters were white, and I think that wasn't by accident at all. And it wasn't until I read James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain that I saw it possible for a Black queer boy who's growing up poor in New York City in a religious household. I didn't know that type of story was possible in literature, and much less on someone's syllabus in like a curriculum. So thinking of like education and writing, like that was one of the most significant turning points in my life, because after that, the characters in my novel or sci-fi, it's not finished, and I don't know if I'll ever finish, but the characters changed. Like they became Black, and I rewrote a lot of what I started writing, and I think I was, after that I was just like hungry for more of his material. So he he opened up a lot of, you know, intellectual ground for me, because I started reading his essays and seeing what he was saying about identity and nation and race and all of these different things. But it was seeing that that character that made me want to write more and made me want to read more about myself. And I also remember, I think the way he handled it in the book was somewhat subtle. So I remember not catching it at first, and it was in you know, the conversation for class where someone else brought it up, and I was just like surprised at how, you know, this was a book from however many years ago, but it really struck me that him as an author knew what I was experiencing. And I think about the quote that he has about, I don't know, I'll paraphrase it, but how you think your pain and your suffering and your heartbreak um, are nowhere to be found in the history of the world, and then you read. So that has been just like, it has held like spiritual weight and work on me after that point. And I think it really influenced, you know, why I want to keep writing and producing, because that's what he did, and it impacted me and so many others so thoroughly. So I think that was one of the first times that, like, you know, that feeling of being seen really hit so deep, and then it transformed how I saw myself, because a lot of what he was saying was also helpful in me um, being able to figure out what I was feeling, because I wasn't really in close proximity with anyone that could do that for me, whether that be other Black queer people or specifically Black queer elders. So I was really um, searching for that, and I think the way that he was able to leave his literature behind, and um, I don't think it's a like a replacement, but it does serve its purpose as offering some clarity and helping with that process of figuring out like who we are. So
Yeah, James Baldwin, uh I love his work. I in undergrad I did my thesis on him, my senior thesis on him, and well, I've always had this theory, but I don't know if it's right or wrong, or I'm pretty sure someone has mentioned it before, but Baldwin in his earlier works wrote like Hemingway. For me, you could see especially in Giovanni's room, you could see the correlations in a lot of how Hemingway writes and how Baldwin writes. But he's one of those writers who's prolific enough and wrote extensively enough. You could see the transformation through time and how he prioritized his blackness with his work. I mean, I guess you could say, I mean, for me, Baldwin's biggest crux as a writer, theorist is, he did write from a very masculine,
Yeah.
gender perspective, but I think a lot of his work on race is definitely one to consider. Um, and I think it's like it's the classics everyone has to, if you're Black and interested in doing any type of work to radicalize yourself, James Baldwin is someone that you can't escape for sure.
Right.
Um, you talked about this a little bit, and so I'll ask it. When do you feel safe? Do you ever feel safe? We talked
I,
about, did I ask that one? I can't remember.
no, I don't think so. I think it's somewhat similar to the home question.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's a nuance to it for sure. The safety question. So,
Mhm.
when do you feel safe?
I definitely feel safest with my chosen family. I think that, um, and I think chosen family is inclusive of friends who became family, and people within my biological family that I have chosen to keep in my life and still recognize as family. So I'm thinking of my mom, a lot of my friends from high school, college. I think in all of those stages, I think the people that I've met have provided me with most of that safety, because I am a reserved person and an introvert. So in order in order to, I think, have all of me present and like show up in that way, I do need to feel safe. Um, and as a Capricorn, I think it's all related. So I think they have given me that space, and I think and what I thought of when I saw this question was also feeling safe when I'm dancing. I think that is one of the actions that I feel like most invincible. I was going to say invisible, but invincible. That's what I meant. And I think that's because when I'm dancing, I think all of my identities in this very like fluid and powerful way just have space to um, just come together and express myself. And I love to dance, and that's also what's been so hard about 2020. I think it's been a lot of stress, and I think one of the ways that I deal with stress is through dance and dancing with my chosen family. So I think that safety has been absent for too long, even though I have been able to still connect with chosen family and find safety that way. I think one of the other main ways hasn't happened in a while. So, and it makes me think about, because I've thought of the question, if we were all free tomorrow, what would be the first thing I do? And I think I would dance. I would dance with all of these people who I love, and a lot of them also love to dance. But I think dancing is something that keeps coming back to me as a very special and rare like occasion where I can have all of myself just feel whole and yeah, just go off, because I think there's a lot of like boldness that I may not show in other um, aspects of my life, and I'm still working on that, like that confidence. But when I'm dancing, like nobody could tell me nothing. It's very much just like I'm here, and I'm giving you all of this energy. So I think that's one of the the best things about like dancing is that like safety to be as wild and ridiculous and doing the most as I want. So
Got you, got you. I'm teasing you a little bit about being reserved. But I said, let me tease you a little bit. I yeah, I appreciate your answer, and I could see. I don't know why, but I could envision you dancing and just being like, uh, more so in grounded in your body, and
mhm.
and out of the mind. Yeah, I like that. Um, when's the first time? Tell me about the first time you realized you were Black.
Yeah, so I think this when I thought of this, it was during high school, and I think that was for multiple reasons. Because you know, since there are different aspects of being Black, because I before high school, I remember what I thought of at least was being followed in stores. I would be with my sisters and my mom, and then I think my mom would end up cursing the store person out. But like those instances of being racialized as Black in a negative way. But I think the first time where I myself was really self-reflective of my race um, was during high school, and I think that was also because before that, being in Brooklyn, I was surrounded by Black people from all over the diaspora, and then in school, I was also surrounded by mostly Black people, and that was elementary through middle school. And it wasn't until high school where I was surrounded by mostly white people in a white space, and a space constructed specifically for whiteness and white people. So I think being in that space, I was also at an age where I could be more self-reflective, because I think during my teenage years, it was, that part of me was definitely just like skyrocketing. I was questioning a lot and thinking about a lot. And in the space, I would be thinking about, I am so hyper visible here. So I have to be hyper aware of my body,
Yeah.
specifically as a racialized body. And then I also felt like in those spaces, like as a self-preservation, self-defense mechanism, the cultural clubs are created in those spaces. So I remember going to meetings where we were talking about like, what does it mean to be Black in a white space? What does it mean to be Black beyond racism, in history, like in all of these different contexts, like social, political. So I was with other people and in community with other people where I could, that self-reflection was feeding off of other people's ideas and how they saw themselves. And then I also remember like in, like after those meetings would happen, like the cultural club meetings and stuff like that, a lot of my friends, a lot of people who would attend the meeting, we would stay behind in like the club room that we were in, and somebody would start playing music and we would all start dancing. So I was experiencing that aspect of Blackness, like the Black joy, the music, the dancing, the hyping each other up in community. And I think that was so important, not only to like release stress from being Black in that space and that ongoing battle, but this is what comes to mind when I think of Blackness, not just the racism and being followed in stores and feeling like you don't belong in these spaces, but it's also finding that community and having, dance parties and all of that stuff. And then the same thing, like we would put on like events and dances where we had control over the DJ and the playlist, so we know it was going to be good, and it wasn't the do like all of that like dancing and music that we would see at like the predominantly white dances. So I think the the joy, the pain, the history, all of those aspects of Blackness was really pronounced during high school. And my first year of high school, that in the spring, that's when George Zimmerman murdered Trayvon Martin.
Mhm.
So not only was I, talking about and experiencing Blackness on, that interpersonal level, but on like in terms of like nation, I was forced to really think about the history and how was that playing out in like modern day issues. And that was one of the very first times I was starting to fear for my life as a person living in this country. So all of that was like happening at the same time. And I think it was all compounding on itself and intensifying, because I think after that, it never let up. Like about a decade later, it's only getting more intense. I'm experiencing more aspects of the joy and that appreciation, but also more fear as to the fate of Black people in this country. So I think it's definitely a lot of what I feel and see now is rooted in those first years of my adolescence.
Yeah, most definitely. Uh, yeah. For me, that in that particular time, uh, it started with Christopher Dorner. I don't know if you
Mm,
remember that. Christopher Dorner was a LAPD cop who basically went on this manhunt against the entire LAPD, and
mm,
they cornered him into a cabin in Big Bear, and
mm.
they lit him on like on
Oh,
fire. Uh, they said that they had shot him prior to lighting the cabin on fire. I saw the whole thing with my two eyes. That didn't happen.
mm,
But I remember that year in particular. It was Christopher Dorner, and I think shortly after, or shortly before, I think it was after Trayvon, the murder of Trayvon happened. And it just seemed um, like the intensities of witnessing these these murders really uh like it just really pronounced itself in the iconography and the imagination of Black people and of America. So I could only imagine being that young, like being a Black young boy. I mean, I was like a little bit older at the time. I think I was your age by the time those things happened. So my,
okay.
my understanding of not that I'm old, but my understanding of these things were like they do happen. I came into the world, Rodney King was getting his ass beat. So it's just like this to me, it was like an extension of what we already know
Hmm.
as the truth. So I could only, I'm reflecting on what you're saying. I could only imagine coming out of adolescence into young adulthood with those things being so visceral
Yeah.
in the reality and the imagination. So that's I think you're speaking to a very particular time, but more specifically, your perspective draws out this opportunity to look at how young Black boys, young Black people have constructed or seen themselves in relations to America, especially if they were young at that time. I,
Hmm.
I would love for, I don't know, I'd love to read, if you have, I just throwing an idea out, I would love to read something in that context, like
Mm.
particular niche of American history in that particular case and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure people have written so many, but in a fictional or non-fictional aspect, that would be interesting to read right now. Mm.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm. When's the first time you realized you were queer?
Um, I think so. The first memory that I have is around elementary school, and I think because in this example, I feel like queerness it was expansive in more of the how Audre Lorde describes eroticism, not just like in terms of like the sexual, but just like the erotic. Because I remember at that time I had a dream, and it's like stayed with me till now because I still remember it. But it was a dream of me running around New York City naked with one of my Black male educators. So I think that was the first instances, but I don't remember like reflecting on it as like me thinking about like queerness. But I think
Your subconscious was screaming heavy in that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's wild to me because I think that like there's like a reason why I like never forgot that, and I appreciate that. But I think during middle school was when I started to be honest with myself about my queerness, and it was a range of things because I went to an all boys middle school. So that complicated the hell out of things because it was predominantly Black and Latinx young men of color, and I remember being in that space, and because one of the things that I remember whenever that would come up, like when people would find out that I went to an all boys middle school, one of the first things that they said was, "Oh, I'm going to turn out gay," and so I think that idea. Sorry.
Who's they? The they that said that.
Like would be like family friends, like people who knew my mom, like just different people like that. And I think that was something that I also experienced with my fellow like classmates and people who were in the school, because there was this overcompensation to be masculine and to prove the like that you were heterosexual. So it was conversations about girls and like all of that stuff. And I remember feeling queer, but not um, not having the space to actually like talk to anybody about it or outrightly say it. And I remember if people were like guys were suspected of being queer, they were being like bullied or teased or anything like that. So it was really there, but I never admitted it to myself. And it wasn't until like my first year of high school where I found like more space to do that. And I think that had to do with like being physically distant away from particularly my like family's household and my mom and like those influences. Because I remember that first year, there was like a club fair, and there was the club that I talked about earlier that dealt with like race and like Blackness. And then there was also like the GSA with a group of people who were queer. And I was like, that was the first time I was seeing people who were explicitly saying that they were queer or were queer affirming. And there was like a physical space for that. And then some of my friends would be asking me, how did I identify? Like, was I curious? Was I straight? Like, and no one was really ever asking me those questions. It was always assumed that I was heterosexual in the first place. So I think after that first year, I finally said it like explicitly to two of my like best friends my sophomore year of high school. So I think it really like spans those years from like middle school into the first years of high school when I realized it, and I think it definitely feels like all of those years like it was that long of a process, as opposed to like an instant or anything like that, which I think reflects also in like the reality of like disclosing it to people, because I don't necessarily use the term coming out, but like with telling people, it's very much like years, like all of all of that time is really needed because of all of the assumptions and the dangers and all of those things.
Most definitely. What is your relationship to your masculinity today?
Um, it's it, I recognize that I have a lot of privilege when it comes to my masculinity and my manhood, and I think that is uncomfortable because you know acknowledging that privilege is uncomfortable. But I think um, it I haven't really thought about it so much until recently because um, it's been a matter of like as you were talking about the people who when they experience like anti-black racism and were murdered, like those are I think for the most part Black cishet men. So I think I in thinking about Black Lives Matter and all that stuff, I wasn't really thinking about my privileged masculinity and gender until recently, when there were more stories about how Black men, cishet men in particular, intracommunally are violent toward other Black people. So and that has really motivated me to try to find more spaces where I'm talking about masculinity and manhood with other Black men in particular. So it's been a conflicted relationship because it is one that is requiring a different kind of responsibility from me compared to my Blackness and my queerness. And because I think when it comes to masculinity, I think about how that influenced even like my education, because like as a Black young boy in elementary school, if you were rambunctious and or I don't even know if I should use that word, but if you were seen as rambunctious by educators, you were like the problem children. But I was always like I've been saying, like more reserved and obedient, so that marked me as more intelligent and more worth time and energy, which because I was in public school until the fourth grade. And then because of how I presented in that way as a young Black masculine boy, that brought me to the all boys middle school, which was a private school. And then that brought me to my high school. And then, so it really, I think it really had something to do with that. And then that's another instance of me having to deal with like the privileges of that kind of Black young masculinity, the more soft-spoken or reserved. And then when I was in the middle school and seeing how like performative masculinity was in very communal ways, it was very just like weird because I'm an only boy. I grew up with four sisters, so being in that opposite extreme of a social space was like very just weird for me. And then in high school, during the boarding school, I was also in an all boys dorm. So that was another because like even in middle school, at least I went home afterward, but like living in that space. And I remember because from high school into college, like most of my friends are Black and Indigenous women. That's who I'm most in community with. And then I remember in high school, like my advisors would be concerned about me because I wasn't hanging out with the other guys in the dorm. And I also remember just like one of the practices in the dorm was like this hazing, and it was like boxing. So I remember like my young self, like they called all of us to the like one of the rooms at the top of the building, and then they started boxing each other. I was like so confused, a little terrified because that's I'm yeah, I'm not that type of person, and I wasn't going to volunteer for that. So and it was like weird because like I remember it feeling like I would have to do so much work and expend so much energy to be in the predominantly masculine spaces. And um I remember finding, you know, a lot of my friends who are still my like close friends now, I found so much more peace with them. And it's funny because like in one of the dining halls, there was like a specific table for my dorm, and they would always sit there. And then a couple tables over, I would be sitting with my close friends every time, and it was just very much like a refusal of that energy, that space, and that masculinity. So even though I embodied masculinity in a lot of ways, I think I had been rejecting community and like spaces where masculinity was so just like
Hyper.
yeah, exactly. And like rampant and just weird. Because I remember just feeling confused a lot of the times because and I think it definitely has to do with me growing up with my sisters and my mom. And I think that stayed consistent into college. Because I remember being asked, you know, how many, you know, male friends do I have? And it was always like very few.
Wow. I'm surprised they even asked you that. That's a weird.
Yeah, yeah, because I think it was also like because in high school, what started happening was when people saw me with my friends, they assumed that I was having like sex with them or whatever. It was never like friendship. It was always like, ooh, like Sacharja is with. It was like teasing and like all of that energy, which was always weird to me because it was the exact opposite. But I think not only race has come to mind when it comes to like friendships and like all that stuff, but like definitely like gender as well. And I find myself not um and I think a lot of like guys would initially be comfortable around me when like as they saw I was masculine and somewhat similar ways to them, but when they found out about my queerness, which was not too late after that, um there was that barrier when I wouldn't be friends or community with them because that made them uncomfortable. And I was pretty outspoken about that through poetry, but also just like um, just like various ways finding opportunities to share my identities in combination with each other like that. So it was not just like I wasn't finding or I wasn't seeking other guys. It was like I think there was that barrier as well. And it wasn't until recently in virtual spaces where I've been a part of conversations with a lot of other Black men of all different backgrounds where we're talking about masculinity as it relates to all of those different um, areas.
How do you want your masculinity to feel?
Um, whew, um, the word that's coming to mind is tender, and I was a part of this workshop, this poetry workshop where um, that was the main focus, like tenderness, and I think in that workshop I got to think about the difference between tenderness and vulnerability, because Black masculinity for me, as it's seen in the dominant way as being overly aggressive, criminal, all of these different things. Like that masculinity in that way, it's vulnerable to state violence because of that. And I think with vulnerability, like there's ways that I can be like vulnerable, but I could it's like a double-edged sword because I could be vulnerable in like a voluntary way, or I could be vulnerable in an involuntary way based on the violence. Yeah. So I feel like masculinity, um, for me, what I want mine to feel like is very much tender, because there's a lot of um, just in saying that word, I feel like there's a lot of agency in like the willingness and the ability to be tender. I think it suggests that there's like safety and space to do that. So thinking of masculinity in conversation with other people's gender or energies, not necessarily gender, but having space to be masculine and not performative. Like I think I've experienced that, like that piece with my friends. So like just not having anything to prove at other people's expense, because I think that's what toxic masculinity is. Yeah.
I'm going to pivot a little bit. What do you want to say to your 12-year-old self? What would you like to say if you could talk to him?
This was a this was a hard question because like, do I warn you about a lot of the stuff that I experienced? Because I feel like, I don't know. I've been thinking about how, like, if I had the wisdom I had now during that time, like the decisions I'm making, how would that like change and not, and then like change who I am? But so I found myself trying to like not say too much, I guess, because I feel like in reflecting, my journey has been gradual and it's built on itself, and I want to.
Clarification. You wouldn't say too much to your 12-year-old self?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I wouldn't want to change too much about like what I'm experiencing now, but I would. One of the things that I.
Quantum physical type of situation. Like, I'm not going to say anything to you because it might mess up the current reality.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because I started thinking about time travel, and you know, in all of the ways that that's been represented. So, but I did think that I would want to point him to some resources and organizations that specifically do work with Black queer people, because I think that was one of the things that I could have benefited more from, and that wouldn't necessarily change too much. And related to that, I think I would point him toward more like specifically like Black queer like sex education resources, because I think, you know, yes, Google and all of that stuff, but I feel like that learning process was very much like stagnant and not what it needed to be. And I think a lot of mistakes that I've made and experienced could have been avoided with that proactive information. And related to that, I think more urgency to be aware of the importance of emotional intelligence and communication, and having myself begin that journey, because it was very much like within the past few years where that's been salient. And I think having that awareness much earlier would have been helpful. And also, I think putting my younger self on, self on to more Black queer history and Black queer literature, because 12-year-old, I think it wasn't really until like, I mean, the James Baldwin book happened, but it wasn't really until like a decade later where I started reading Essex Hemphill, Joseph Beam, Marlon Riggs, all of these names that has had such an impact on me. So I think really surrounding myself with that literature and that history and that knowledge would also just give me a lot of like protection when it came to society and those around me, trying to influence my identities and how I saw myself. So I would definitely, you know, maybe drop off a couple books for me to read or something like that, or put together, I don't know, a Google Doc and like send that. But I think having all of that information would have been really transformative at that point.
Got you. What do you want to hear from your 60-year-old self?
I want to know how it feels to be a Black queer elder.
Ooh, yes.
And I think there's, and the reasoning for that is like there's just like in all of those names that I just listed, there's just like this very visceral pain that I feel when I think about the the HIV/AIDS pandemic and epidemic, and how this country responded to that, and how a lot of the spaces that are here right now would have been so much more vibrant and all of that if so many of the people who I claim as ancestors weren't left for dead by this government. So I think Black queer elders have been stolen
Yep.
from us, or rather, the the American country, the United States, has stolen a lot of Black queer elders from our community. And me making it to 60 years old, I think is um, powerful for many reasons. So I would want to know how how is that feeling, like on a very like physical level, like how do you feel like emotionally, politically, socially, all of these different things, and what spaces have I been able to protect and cultivate for Black queer people. And I thought of asking about a partner and where do I find him and all of these different things, but I think mostly just that embodied reality of being a Black queer elder. I'm very curious as to what that is like.
There's this wonderful book called The Angel of History by Rabi Alamuddin, who
Hmm.
talks about that, um about how, particularly in the gay community, I wouldn't say more so in the queer community, there's a distinction, that there is a tendency, particularly with white gay men, to forget, uh,
Mm.
that there is a generation of queer people who are gone, as a result of HIV/AIDS that happened in the 80s and 90s. So I think it's interesting that you're interested in that, and
Mm.
one, experiencing being elderly, but also knowing that there is a whole sect of information, stories, people, histories that we don't even have access to, because so many of us have been essentially left for dead.
Right.
I think though, and that's something that I've thought about in my own queer theory courses, or just like in connecting and talking with folks. It's part of queering that time is to kind of reimagine it and create the elderly, the queer elder that we want to
Right.
to one, experience, know, gain wisdom from, but also to become that queer elder that we've always
Hmm.
thought is possible. You
Right.
know, so I think that's a beautiful answer. I'm excited. I'm excited for you, your 60-year-old self. to know him and talk to him. I also, okay, this is gonna sound so naughty, but I am gonna say this. So I in Black.Queer.Alive, when I look at the form and see who's responded, I take
Mhm.
everyone. Like, everyone's gonna get interviewed, but I prioritize people who are older. So if you're
Mm.
like 50 and up, which or like 60, I'm like, I want to know your story. Like, to me,
Yeah.
it's interesting. Um, is the most interesting. But I have this weird little fantasy of running into like this Southern Black gay man who's like 60 plus and who still walks around saying like faggot and tranny and and says like all these politically incorrect um terminology that someone our age would never, really engage with, only to get that piece of time,
Mm.
language to, and, we know it's wrong. We shouldn't say this word, but to get that, to get that temperature, to get that timestamp that is lost. So
Right.
I'm interested in older queer elders who are not politically correct. I'm interested in queer elders who are like, yes, I fought here, but I also, was a sailor and I traveled around the world and I was doing. I'm interested in that. So it's you're saying this, and in my head, I was thinking this a couple of days. I said, I want someone who's just like real fucking grunge. I want like grunge 67-year-old man who's just like, you know what? Yeah, I sucked some dicks in lives, and yeah, but fuck it, I'm here. Like that's my dream.
Got you.
It's such a random. It's so random, but I want to meet a queer elder like that. I'm sorry.
No,
Like,
I understand.
I'll get there. I'll find somewhere down the line with this series. I will find it. The thought of it, the thought is me. Sacharja, how do you experience love, my dear?
um, I and this was also, I guess, another challenging question when it came to like experiencing love for myself. Um, and I think, especially because I think so much has been shaped by this past year, 2020. And I think just experiencing new levels of depression and rage and um, inability to love on myself as I should, that has influenced me to be more aware of it, or the ways that I do uh, show love. And I think that for a long time, coming out of high school and doing track and fields specifically, that influenced how I saw like nutrition, physical activity, all of these different things. So I definitely love on myself by trying to stay active, and like eating, because I eat a lot, uh, based on my metabolism. So I wasn't.
Metabolism.
Yeah, yeah. It is honestly like a problem because it's, well, okay, it's a problem in the sense that like after I got out of school and I wasn't having like an all you can eat buffet type service. When I had to start cooking for myself, it was like this is a lot. But I do think that it was also just like incredibly difficult during 2020, because I remember there was like weeks when just taking everything that was happening in from the pandemic to the anti-Black violence, to stuff going on with my family. Like I just wasn't eating or drinking water, and that was, and it's like weird because it's the complete opposite of what I had disciplined myself to do before. So I think I, in a sense, like deepened that love for myself with however much effort it took to eat consistently and hydrate throughout the day. I think that was um, how I really began to like experience that love on myself again. And also um, a lot of hair care. That's what also comes to mind, because I remember the first time I started growing out my hair, I think I did it because it was supposed to be a symbol that I had found my chosen family and people I could see myself spending time with for the rest of my life. And the first time I didn't know everything I know now, so it was looking kind of rough. So I cut it off and started growing out my hair again in college. But I think there's something just so deeply satisfying as to seeing like the progress and being diligent with the care, and having it be something culturally like embraced by other Black people. So I think I love on myself definitely by keeping this as healthy as I can.
It's really beautiful. I think I've said
Thank you.
But it reminds me of when I had my coif, like when my hair goes out, looks like that. It's so gorgeous.
Thank you so much. And I think, um, yeah, I think a lot of what comes to mind is caring for my body, because especially coming out of college, and this is also like after in one of my education studies classes, we read Bell Hooks, Teaching to Transgress, and in that she talks about the mind-body split, and that really transformed the way I saw myself and the world, because it really moved me to be aware of myself as a holistic body and not just like my mind or anything like that. So it built on, the practices of like, what am I eating? How much am I sleeping? How am I taking care of myself? And then that goes into, like showering and then applying the shea butter, like all of these different things to really love on myself for me. Because I think there are ways where I can, do a workout or groom myself even for the gaze of someone else, like a partner or being in public. And with quarantine, given that I wasn't really going anywhere, I often didn't even feel the need to like do my hair nice or anything like that. But it was like, yeah, so how do I like love on myself for me first and then have other people join in on that celebration? So I think that was a shift that happened during quarantine, and I'm looking to maintain that, because I think there will still be challenges when it comes to just finding time to do all of that given everything going on. But I'm actively like making space. Like yesterday I tried, aloe vera for the first time, just like
Yeah.
finding new ways to, love on myself. So
I always liked aloe vera because it's a nice alternative to like synthetic gel that,
yeah. Hmm.
or like, they use eco gel. I never liked that.
Yeah.
I like aloe vera. It's good for hair retention, growth retention,
Right. Hmm.
and holding in moisture. You're,
Yes. Yes.
I'm like, yes, I need to go back into my own little hair routines that I used to have a long, long time ago. If you could, would you change your identity? And I've extended this question to, if you want to be a tree, or some I had a beautiful answer today. Someone said I wanted to be a comet, and I was like, whoa, that's a whole nother level. But what would you, if you could, what would you change yourself to be?
um, I hmm. I actually don't know. I because I think I mean I've thought about like reincarnation and like past lives and like other stuff like that, but I think um it's never been as strong as thinking of like human embodied experience, I guess. Um so I don't know, and I feel like it would take me forever to like land on something. Um but because when I saw this question originally, like if I would change any part of like my identity or anything like that, it was like a definite no.
Yeah.
And I think that that comes from just like feeling that I'm possible because of my ancestors and um, all of the work that has done to make Black lives more livable in this world. Because I was also thinking of for me when it comes to like certain hypotheticals, like what if I wasn't Black, or what if I wasn't queer? Like it becomes like not useful for me, because I think of all of the reasons and decisions that were made before me to lead up to me. And I think in the sense of like even my mom. My mom's originally from Jamaica, and there were reasons why she immigrated from there to here to then meet my father. And then there was a reason why she found some community in New York City specifically. So I feel like the more that I think about it, the more I see all of these different factors, and all of those factors influencing decisions and choices leading up to me. So I feel like if I were to change any part of my identity, it's like pulling at a piece of let's say like a tapestry or something, and then it starts all unraveling. Yeah.
I think that's an interesting perspective for sure. I, it seems like you're like, are you interested in quantum physics? Like, do you think a lot of girls like you're like, I can't change this because do you think
That's a
about
good question.
that?
I, yeah, I do. Because I feel like I guess it's just me as an intense person, but I feel like a lot of the times it's the thought of every decision is important and it'll have a specific impact. And I think in that Ocean Vyong podcast, I think he was talking about this as well as it relates to queerness, where I think I'm much more aware of my actions as like a queer writer, because the decisions that I would be making when it comes to how I present myself, and this goes to Blackness as well, but like there's a lot of like awareness and self-awareness that has gone into like navigating spaces, and then that reflects into or that applies also to like a writer. Like I'm, as a poet, I'm like specifically seeking out this specific word to do the work that I want. So I think that all of that like reflects, I guess, my like personality and characteristics, where I think, you know, there's so much at stake with certain decisions. So I feel like not only am I making decisions based on that, but I feel like in the past, if I change anything, everything gets like messed up in whatever capacity. So I don't know. It's also me like overthinking a lot of things, like what if. But I think that is my like mindset all the time.
Yeah, it's a beautiful one, and it's unique to you as an individual.
Mhm.
Is there anything that I didn't ask that you really want to touch upon right now?
Um, well, something related, I guess, to the last question, and like why I just can't imagine myself being any other person or identity is that I feel like I have grown just so appreciative and prideful for aspects of Blackness, when it comes to like the culture, the music, but also like the dancing. Like when I see particularly like white people, and when it comes to dancing, I was like, I can't imagine having that embodied experience. Like I feel like it's it's wild to me because I so much of how I like move, particularly with dancing, is just like I think of like the Jamaican background, the African descendant background, and like the music and like the spiritual experience and like the history of like why do our hips do what they do, and it's like, and then also like the food. Like again, I love to eat, so it's like the cuisine and like the thought and the history of that, and also like the empathy, because I feel like as Black people, sometimes we even have too much empathy for other non-Black people, and that comes at our expense. But I feel like, again, given our history and what we've been through, like our social position is unmatched when it comes to how are we related to freedom, perhaps more so than we are related to like oppression and all these different things, because undoubtedly like the Black experience has a lot of keys to the future that we all need. So it's like, how can I imagine not being of this community, and specifically a Black queer community? Because I've seen a lot of people say how like Blackness is inherently queer in a lot of ways.
I,
Um,
I'm one of those people that
yeah,
to be Black in America is to be queer, like
right.
period. A lot of people would say otherwise, but I think, I mean, all the evidence proves.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think about that often, and and it just puts me in this position of like overwhelming gratitude, because and I actively try to remember like it's Blackness is not just struggle, and and in saying that, it's like, okay, let's not center the fact that there are a lot of reasons to be fearful and frustrated, and there's a lot of work being done to put us in danger. But at the same time, it's like I wouldn't be an abolitionist, and I wouldn't be fighting so hard for our liberation if I didn't know like the affirming reality of what we are, and not just what we are up against. So I think that's something that I definitely do want to get across, and how I've come to um, love, and I still have so much more to love about my Blackness and my queerness, in combination with each other, and also the how that shows up in other people, because I think my strongest connections have been with Black queer people, and I think that it's without, it's like not by accident. So yeah,
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sacharja, for
thank you.
yeah, for this interview. I'm gonna stop us right here.
Okay.